Soulful Sauna, Stories of Self-Mastery. Thank you for joining us. It is you, the viewer, that makes this podcast. Your host, Juliette Noske, and her guests are here to share stories of self-mastery, to inspire you and ignite the power of positive change on your own journey. Thank you for being with us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soulful Sauna. My name is Juliette, and I'm your host. And today we have the lovely Laura Swann with us. Laura Swann is a priestess and an alchemist, a wild medicine woman. I was going to say wise woman, and I'm sure you're that as well. And a birthkeeper and a soul midwife. Welcome, Laura. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And I was just commenting how much I love the paintings behind you and your background. So even if you're not in the sauna, you still have those mystical, misty paintings in the background, which look lovely.
Yeah, I'm here in my husband's office, which is quite unusual. Normally I'm in my own office with all my herbs behind me. So yeah, it's a different place for me to be. But since we're now on holidays, it's better for me to be here.
Yeah, yeah. And tell me more about your office with your herbs and other goodies in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I've only lived in this house for 6 months, so it's taken me a while to well, I mean, I've been self-employed for 8 years, so it's taken me 8 years to get to a point where I actually have my own space to work from, which is really exciting. Um, and it's just going through, I think, many rebirths, and I'm sure it will continue to do so. I have everything in there. I have a corner that is more of an apothecary, and then I've got a kind of art corner, lots and lots and lots of books and all sorts of weird and wonderful things collected from many sort of years and working in these realms. So yeah, it's a big mishmash, but it's a very cozy, and everyone always walks in and says, oh, this feels nice. And so it's a real testament to kind of being surrounded by all those herbs and magic.
Yeah, lovely.
Mm.
And so, one of my first questions is going to be to you. Have you got a sauna story?
Yes, a few. Yeah, a few different ones. What kind of sauna story would you like to begin with?
Um, Maybe a fun and creative one if you have one.
Hmm. Yeah, I think probably it would be then the most recent one that I had with a dear friend, dear sister, and we went around Selwyn, and we both kind of had that real pull to go to the sauna and to kind of make it our own. And as fate would have it, we were able to have it to ourselves. And yeah, thus ensued a very creative sauna. So we'd brought with us some salts, and rather auspiciously, the lady at the reception of the sauna had been brought some holm oak, and that had been made into a whisk. And that was quite significant for me because the holm oak is a massive oak tree outside our new house that seems to protect the house. So it was a really kind of auspicious moment, and receiving it felt like quite a gift because it's quite an unusual tree. Like, not a lot of people connect to the holm oak in general. And yeah, my friend had bought with her some other bits and bobs. We had some tarot cards, and yeah, we basically just allowed ourselves to I guess, which is what always happens in the sauna, just see what wanted to come, what needed to be aired. And it's always amazing, isn't it, the alchemy of fire and water, and what that process of transformation brings. And yeah, eventually we were sort of naked and scrubbing one another with sugar, and doing sort of a more of a healing session where we could sort of sense the energies that were there that needed to be shifted, and working on different parts of each other's body to kind of move things along. So yeah, it was very sacred and intimate, but really powerful. And yeah, just wish I owned a sauna.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, they are wonderful places, and it must be nice to have one in your own space as well, I
Mm.
think. And I did actually interview someone, and they said the temperature of the normal gym saunas is actually way too high, and it's better to have them between 60 to 80 about, and then yeah, and a bit more humidity.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because if it really does hail from a culture where we can sit and storytell, we're not trying to purge ourselves, we're actually trying to kind of sit for longer in community, I suppose.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful time spent.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So tell me, on your journey, on your own journey, when do you think your self-mastery journey began?
Gosh, I mean, I genuinely feel like souls are guided into this life for their purpose. So I sort of feel like that invitation gets met way back, and it's on landing Earth side that we get, or perhaps even before that, in our wombscapes, that we begin that journey.
Mm. And do you remember back to that time?
No, but I do a lot of work with people to connect them to their soul babies, and in doing so, we often do like womb regressions and rebirths. And actually, um, one of the most powerful things I think you can do in the sauna is to connect to that, and to come back to that sense of the womb and the mother's womb and how you felt, and perhaps using it as a possible place for re-imprinting, particularly if you had quite a tough uh, inward journey.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that reminds me of my mum, because she was actually a twin, and the twin was aborted and unfortunately didn't survive. And then they realized that there was a second baby, and that was my mum. So I
Oh,
would
so
imagine.
it wasn't like a medical reason for aborting one twin. It was actually thinking that they were aborting.
No, she a miscarriage, sorry, not an abortion, a miscarriage. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so miscarried.
Interesting, because there's a really powerful sort of understanding about twin pregnancies where the other twin gets reabsorbed back into, and so there's often those children. I don't know if your mother kind of feels this way, but often they feel like, yeah, that there's this missing part, or they can't quite explain, but there is this kind of double duality to them.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
definitely.
And
And
does she work with that or speak to that, or?
she has done, yeah.
Yeah.
And she actually joined a missing twin society for a while as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I've met your
Um,
mom. I just think she's amazing.
yes.
Absolutely amazing woman. Wow. Yeah, how special. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really profound. Coming in
Mm,
as that twin, and yeah, wow. I can't imagine. Yeah.
yeah. So tell me more about your soul midwife or midwifery.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do actually feel like it's a term that gets used in different ways, and the way that I use it, I know that soul midwifery particularly does speak to, and using it in the way of a death doula, for example.
Mm,
But I actually believe that a soul midwife can really be the full spectrum of experience, all the way from conscious conception through loss and miscarriage and abortion, into souls actually landing earthside and being a doula or a midwife of the soul all the way through somebody's life, um, and then through death as well. So I don't think it kind of necessarily needs to be sort of compartmentalized into death doulaing, although it's a beautiful way to explain what that is doing. So yeah, with my work, I do see it as quite multifaceted, and some people sort of ask me, oh, you seem to do a lot, and actually I don't. I just feel like it's all part and parcel of the same thing, that it's all just part of service, whether it's souls coming in or souls leaving.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And also this ancestral alchemy that you talk about as well. And I've been connecting a lot more to my ancestors. I have ancestors from all different backgrounds, as I'm sure a lot of people do. And just really feeling into the energy of those different ancestors, where they were from, what they were experiencing, or what they have experienced over their time. Can you tell us anything more about ancestral alchemy?
Yeah, goodness, it's such a big, broad topic, but the way that I work with it is that often, for example, people will come to me with a sense of maybe needing to work with birth trauma, for example, and that they've had a birth that has connected them into this story fragment about themselves. And when we start to kind of work with that yarn of that story, it always seems to unravel further and further and further back. And the way that I work, I feel I get a real sense of those ancestors wanting to help, and those benevolent guides being particularly there to help us to, because I think that so many people who are born and who are alive now are here because they're chain breakers, or rather they're reweavers of their stories. And so um, a lot of the time, someone will come with that sort of top layer of something, and we'll start to work to kind of peel it back. And I guess in the sense of therapeutically, I can help them potentially. With some people, they work with me for a very, very long time. For others, it's a shorter time. But I'm always really cautious that this is not something that's like, I'm not doing anything to fix somebody or sort of change something. We're basically just enabling a chance for that landscape to be traversed in a different way, or for something else to open up and a different piece of the puzzle to click into place and allow like a natural sense of coming back. I think a lot of the time in sort of shamanic healing work, we talk about soul fragmentation, and that's really powerful, and it has to be very tenderly and carefully worked with. We can't rush, and as much as sometimes people really, they're like, oh, can I have my next session soon, and I'm like, well, let's wait a full moon cycle or 3, or let's see what needs to come. And that deep trust in something beyond ourselves is often also part of it. Is like the fragmentation has not only taken us out of the story of our own ancestry, but it's taken us out of the story of us as a whole, being part of the whole. And so there's something in reconnecting with the seasons and the cycles that is in deep trust and surrender. And it's quite interesting talking to you about this topic now, because like we are literally sat in the mother night, the darkest nights before the rebirth, and the kind of alchemy of that 3-day period. And it takes a lot for somebody to trust in the dark, and to really allow themselves to go back into something that is potentially incredibly traumatic and painful, and to find a way through, and not only to be offered a way through, but to actually find a strength within themselves to walk through it. you know, in a way that perhaps their child's version of themselves didn't have, or, you know, whatever it may be. So yeah, it's, I sort of work in these polarities of the light and the darkness a lot, and it's really fascinating to have the spectrum of life unfold in that, and also it's a lot to hold, you know. But yeah, that's a little bit of how I kind of work with it.
Yeah. And so is there a weaving together of this ancestral alchemy and the soul midwifery then?
Definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. Every single journey that I'm ever asked to walk with somebody, um, it's part of the journey. And so, you know, for example, with my birth keeping, I've never been sort of a birth keeper that could go on a level of like, oh, let's have 2 antenatal sessions and I'll be at your birth and then that'll be that. And there's always this much deeper journey that I'm called to go on with someone to really examine their birth story, their partner's birth story, what the predominant knowledge is that's trickling in. And often, you know, people think that they don't know a lot. And then once they start to connect, things, you know, things start to land, and information starts to come from places they didn't realize. And then, you know, they'll suddenly click a lot of dots together. And I do believe that the soul of the baby also calls the mothers forward, and that most of the babies that, you know, are coming through, whenever I finally get that chance to sort of look in their eyes, I'm really like, wow, I know that you've been there kind of directing this woman to step into a greater version of herself, to birth you as a soul, you know. So it's, yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful, powerful work,
Mm.
because our ancestry is our future and vice versa, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if time doesn't exist, then everything is one.
Yeah, yeah, quite.
So are you a doula as well then?
Yeah, I've kind of stepped away from the word doula so much. I mean, I
Right.
wouldn't use it just because it's helpful. Most people now do actually know what a doula is, whereas they didn't used to. Um,
So
and I don't know if this is like a correct sort of understanding of it, but it's just from my own journey where I've decided to kind of take it, is that I no longer go into the system in any way. I don't work alongside, you know, medical midwifery or anything like that anymore. So um, for me, Birthkeeper really encompasses that. That's the role I've chosen to walk, is much more of a kind of traditional midwife role rather than the kind of medical side. And, you know, there's people for everything. And I think that to some degree, there was a big journey I had to go on to kind of reconcile myself from stepping away from it. And then to another degree, a deep soul path that said, no, you know, I'm definitely part of that rising tide of people who are stepping into the reclamation of birth as a human community event, you know. Yeah.
wow. That sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful, and I get to work with amazing families. And what I find so wonderful is that often, you know, the mother is really like there. She knows what she wants, and a lot of the time, her partner's catching up with what what she sees needs to happen. And the most beautiful thing is that these beautiful sacred masculine are so willing to go on the journey. And it's not to say that they don't all have a lot to do, and the mothers as well, they have a lot of work to do, but they're just so there. And then when it's all said and done, and we've sat in the woods for days on end together, and we've chatted and we've done all of this work, you know, witnessing that man look into his baby's eyes and catching his own child and witnessing the healing process that kind of ripples from that is just, there's just no other feeling like it. Yeah.
Mm. Wonderful. I'm gonna come back to something that you mentioned, which I definitely feel happening in my life, which is chain breakers or reweavers. And
I saw your face when I said that. I was like, oh yeah, exactly.
Mm. So in your own life, can you see many examples where you have been the chain breaker and the reweaver?
God, yeah. I couldn't hold this space if I hadn't have had to have walked the depths of that many times over, I think. And yeah, I believe truly in that sense of, you know, the black sheep that comes into the family who is there to do the work. And so many of my friends and close sisters, and you know, that they've all got that story of just a deep knowing of that. And even though it can get very tough and very dark, and you've had to travel some really uncharted paths, um, it's really very powerful. And I think it's a little bit like when you talk about what's the word, when you end up doing kind of cord cutting, for example. And a lot of people can talk about cutting cords and you've got to be so careful with those terms and with the way that you do things, because cutting cords isn't actually about doing that in that brutal way, because actually it can create more fragmentation and more pain and more trauma. It's like and so to kind of, yeah, describe it as reweaving it, it's like, how do I bring it back together in a more peaceful and harmonious way within myself? And how do I, you know, not try and shun it or pretend it didn't happen or turn away from it, but actually turn towards it and befriend it and make it part of this powerful story.
Mm. And do you have an example at all for those people out there who may be wondering what exactly you mean by this? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was born, my mother had been through a lot of trauma in her own childhood and a lot of physical abuse, um, not to mention, you know, the sort of mental emotional side. And I think a lot of it in that generation had been very much like, you don't speak about it, it didn't happen, you have to suppress it. And, you know, so many of us kind of have mothers and grandmothers who went through that in so many ways, you know, whether it was about concealing children or whatever it might have been. And so there's this sort of there was this knowing from quite a young age that something wasn't quite right, and then trying to reconcile what it was to not have a mother, because my mother wasn't able to mother me. And so I began very much in the darkness of, I didn't trust women, I didn't trust myself, I didn't trust um, what it meant to be a woman even. And I really did sort of, you know, it was repulsive at points. And um I went on this very big journey of kind of reconciling what that was for me, and knowing that before I became a mother myself, it was really important to me to work with all of that and work with what it would mean to me to be a mother. And so I felt like it was so stripped back, and having to be very real and raw and truthful and go to all of those awful places of shame and gaslighting and pain and all of that. And um, kind of end up at a place, like I say, there isn't really any fixing when something has been so traumatic. We can't, you know, when someone dies, there's still a very strange sort of thing in this culture that it'll all be better in however long. And I think really the truth of it is, it's not any better. It's just we just learn to cope a little easier, perhaps. And um yeah, I guess it's finding ways through our humanity to find the beauty in the story, and the medicine in it and the magic in it, and hopefully to be able to be then one of those more healed ancestors who's not passing the trauma further down the line. Because we
Yeah,
know ourselves how disruptive that is, right, to our ability to be in our best version of ourselves, or whatever that may be.
yeah, yeah. And I can also see how if we just focus on cutting the cords of something, and we almost tend to go to the other extreme of something rather than understanding maybe that that's not the way you want it. So for example, my mother's mother was very, very controlling, and um things were, not allowed and restricted. And then my mum went the opposite because she wanted something different from us. So we were very wild and free and, um, completely unrestricted. And so I think we almost went in the other way, rather than, if you maybe have an understanding of it and then do reweaving, you can come to a more balanced place. And I think that's what we're learning as a humanity, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, it's huge work, and you can't blame your mum for that, for her being wanting to go the other way, because it is so hard. It's really, really hard to face those things. And when my own child kind of triggers me, it's a really interesting dynamic to go on, and again, to each time connect with that medicine of, like, I'm allowed to set boundaries as a parent that's healthy for my child. And then where does that go too far, and where not enough, and it's, oh gosh, it's huge and fascinating, and yeah, takes up a lot
Mm.
of mothers' days, I'm sure, this
Yeah.
psychoanalysis of ourselves as mothers. But yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And I really love when you spoke about how you speak with both the parents about their own birth stories and birth experiences of maybe their own, as well as any within the family. I think that is really powerful. And I've often spoken to people who are going to be mothers, and perhaps with their first child they've been one way, and then later, having experienced it, they have a second child, and they do things completely differently. And if they'd have had that, maybe that opportunity to speak about things before and get clear on things in your own mind, things that we maybe don't really think about speaking about, and like you say, we don't think we remember until we actually start talking, and then we bounce off each other and we realize that we know a lot more than we thought.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really interesting, because a lot of my work initially began as reclamation births. They were often women looking for that. They'd gone through it the first time, they'd gone through, been totally traumatized, and they were now looking to have that VBAC, the vaginal birth after cesarean, or they were, and I really kind of found that heroine's journey work, that pathway through that was so effective. Like, it really is so ideal. And the it's not just the women, of course it's not, but ultimately they're the ones that have to go through their veil, and ultimately die the full death, to rebirth. And so um yeah, it was interesting that after a while I did start to get the first time mothers, as people became more awakened to what could be possible. And even though they're first time mothers, in the system, they would be totally treated and infantilized. And yet, here they were, very clear about what they wanted and why, and understanding how important that was. And then seeing them do that, and knowing that there's a child there that's being mothered by somebody who isn't spending 23 hours a day, in traumatic stress mode, or wondering if she could have done a better job or whatever, and in fact has just gifted her child this most, what should be the easiest thing in the world, you know, to just gift this child a peaceful landing. And so often mothers are gaslit into thinking that there's something wrong with them, when actually there's just something wrong with the world of birth, you know, and the way that we have cultured birth.
Mm. Wow, fantastic work that you are doing out there in the world.
Yeah, well, we need more of us. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot more people that I'm aware of now, like this real resurgence of birth reclamation is really happening, and it's important to be part of that. And yeah, it's really humbling to kind of be a tiny cog in a machine, and only really have so much trust in working so deeply with people over such long journeys. You know, I'm a mother myself, I'm self-employed, like I can't take on the world, and yet there is that kind of peace, I think, that comes with knowing that what you're doing feels really aligned and really deeply what you're here for, and that, you know, that feels good even in the smallest way. And if you can have an effect even on one family or one generation or one, you know, that's really powerful.
Mm. Yeah. And can you tell us a bit more about your own journey? So when you went to school, did you know who you wanted to be or what you wanted to be when you grew up, or did you have any
I knew I
idea?
was very different. I knew I wasn't like most of the other kids I went to school with, let's put it that way. Yeah, I had a very interesting dynamic at home. So my mum was very ill, but then my dad had always been a musician, a poet, you know, a writer, very creative and a bit offbeat and a bit kind of, yeah, such an amazing man. And he really steered me, or rather, I shouldn't say he steered me because he didn't at all. He was always very, very open and said, you know, as long as you're happy, just make that your path. And he would go on pilgrimages, and then when I got old enough to join him, I would go, and we would go to all these amazing places and kind of do, you know, wheel of the year things. And for my 21st birthday he took me to Glastonbury, but on the way he did like an Arthur and Guinevere story thing. I still have this massive folder of all this writing that he did about the legends of Arthur and Guinevere. And yeah, it was really beautiful, like being brought up by somebody who had this really open spiritual connection. And one of his friends was a philosopher and had written books about philosophy. And I think that was what I sort of decided to do, was to study philosophy and also dance at the same time. So I found a course that did philosophy and dance, and it kind of married two parts of myself that had been really important. One was being quite a daydreamer. I'm a double Aquarius, and you know, always thinking and thinking out of the box. And the other was this kind of weird healing path for me, which was to move and to kind of need to move through the energy of our home life, which was particularly hard. And yeah, so I mean, I kind of it's like I say, I was always holding the polarities, because on one sense I'd be going to school and kind of dressed in all my school stuff and kind of getting on with the day, and then in the other hand I would come home, and my mum had tried to kill herself again, you know. And it was always like this really strange thing. And then on the weekend we'd go to a fire festival, so it was just like this bizarre enmeshment of strangeness, which we were all just trying to get through, I think. But yeah, it was interesting. And I think my my dad really was an anchor for me. And he, in as much as somebody who's quite unanchored can be an anchor in the strangest way, you know, he really was holding that ability to daydream. And I know that obviously, like, rather than kind of speak to sort of where that the potential for that in sort of spiritual bypassing, that there was an enabling of escapism from something that was actually quite horrific on a daily basis. So yeah, it was yeah, I forget what the original question was now.
If you knew what you wanted to be when you grew up.
I guess I didn't exactly, but looking back and in hindsight, I can definitely see how it's all woven together so beautifully. And yeah, I think I have a lot of connection to the earth and to this ability to tap into things slightly beyond. And I guess that's not something you can really look for in a school careers job thing, but eventually people keep coming to you, and more often than not they're saying, well, what was that you did? And you sort of go, well, I'm not sure, I'm just following what I'm being told to do. And you know, so it's sort of something that comes from that deep listening of maybe not knowing in the knowledge way, but the gnosis way. Yeah.
Wonderful. And when we spoke before as well, briefly, you mentioned one of your mentors who you've worked with in regards to holding space. Would you be able to tell us more about this mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few different mentors that have taught me to hold space in different ways. Um, but yeah, this one in particular, um, I would have to say, I think I found really incredible compared to, I think, a lot of the mentors that I'd gone to, whether or not it matters, I don't know, but certainly on a human level, I'd gone to female mentors, and um, I needed that on my journey. I really needed to reconnect to the feminine, and to a feminine that was true and anchored and healed. And yeah, so that's been really important, but also in the sense of, you know, connecting to creativity and the sort of very positive feminine aspects that I needed to reconnect to, because my mother was an artist as well, so that was a big thing for me, was that I found then being creative had this real block, because it was like, oh no, that's where that way madness lies, which of course it does, but in a really beautiful way. Um and so I'd sort of learned a lot of space holding from women and a lot of different things. And then when I started learning with this particular person, and he was a man, it sort of came in at this really auspicious time when I'd lost my father, and I'd felt totally untethered and unanchored. And then suddenly there was this sort of very different way of approaching the work that I was doing. And I really needed that. I really needed that masculine sense. And what I loved about his teaching in particular was that it's incredibly clear and concise in a lot of ways. And yet, right at the end, he sort of backspins it on itself and says, but always trust what you should be doing. And so what then happens from that is that you have a framework, and you can utilize that framework, and you can use it exactly if that makes you feel really, really empowered and strong. But eventually you start to be able to play with it, and to, you know, be given guidance that you can go slightly outside of the box. So it's this amazing way of teaching, that there isn't a right way, but there's a good way to begin from that framework of like a stable foundation and go onwards. And it was, yeah, it was incredibly powerful to have that. And I now feel having just turned 40, I keep having over the last couple of years, well, it's been probably more than that actually, over the last few years, this call to work alongside a mentor, a male mentor who wants to hold space with me, to do male and female space holding. And so I'm sort of dreaming into that at the moment in this time, and trying to see how that, because it's totally, not something I've done before, and yet I can sort of feel it as something that might feel like, once I get going, really organic and really lovely and really necessary. And I feel like those spaces are coming, where we need to be able to fall apart in front of our masculine counterparts as well, and vice versa, and that healing and that kind of alchemy is like the next bit for me, possibly. We'll see. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds yeah, it sounds like very similar to my journey on with teaching, I guess, where you have the structure of the session, the drama workshop or whatever it is, and then within that you have the improvisation and flow, and yeah. And so you had lots of female mentors as well. And what kind of studying did you do then to bring you to where you are today?
Gosh, I've done so much. So I did a 2-year yoga teacher training, which was all somatic framework, body psychotherapy, embodiment. So not at all kind of, a quick yoga course of learning asana at all, but like quite a deep embodied course for a couple of years. And in that we did a lot of work on the hips and mother and woman, and that was pretty powerful. And then that was where I originally heard the word doula, and I was like, oh, what is that word? I need to know what that is. And I literally sort of followed the breadcrumbs, and then I joined a doula training where I was the only woman there who'd never given birth, so everybody had kind of come with a lot of trauma and stories, and I was like, I want to come here and do this, and not come with trauma and stories, that need to be healed. And obviously I had my own birth and my own mother story to heal from, but that was quite interesting. And then from there, just a lot of different things that were complementary. So doing mother and baby yoga teacher training, and then doing all sorts of different mother baby courses, and then on the sort of more spiritual side, doing my priestess training, which was really interesting because the way that the way it came about, I wasn't particularly looking for it or grasping for it or sort of searching for it. And from what I already was aware of, there wasn't anything that I particularly felt truly drawn to. And then this particular teacher and this thing came up, and I was like, okay, that's it, I'm gonna go. And it was a year-long 13 moons journey together, but it culminated in this huge women's sort of week-long journey in Glastonbury, doing plant medicine and all sorts of different things. And that was really powerful because it sort of suddenly gave me that deep framework where I'd been very connected to the seasons and cycles and the land through dad, and very like, already very tuned into like mysticism and story through philosophy. And I'd done a lot of like, I knew a lot of the archetypal stories and things like that. But this was really fascinating because it was sort of a remembrance of all of these things that you're interested in. They all come together under this one path. And it really surprised me, and there was the herbalism, and there was the shamanism, and there was, different pieces that all came under one thing. And I was like, oh, okay. And yeah, and then, you know, I stepped onto that path and just sort of started walking that. And I think once you step onto it, you don't ever step off it. You know, you're a continual, perpetual student of the mystery, and that's that. Um, so so yeah, and I'm trying to think. I mean, I've done a lot of different things in folk herbalism and plant consciousness, and so all of it, like I say, it all sort of weaves together in my work in one way or another. Somehow they all find their way in, but I don't kind of overthink it. I just let them weave in whenever they tell me they're coming.
Mm. And as a healer, do you find that you still work with other healers when things come up for you, or do you work through them yourself with your own teachings, or is it a
Yeah,
mixture?
God, such a mixture. I mean, I think firstly, I still have a bit of a aversion to being called a healer. Do you know? I feel like it's a bit of like a witch wound, maybe, where you're like, oh, um, and you know that you do something, but you don't really want to take ownership of that. Um, but yes, there's sort of both, isn't there? That you're a facilitator, you're a channel, there's something that happens anyway. But yeah, healer's one of those words that I struggle with. But um, I think what gets harder and harder, what I've found certainly, is that the more that you delve into this work, the more you become discerning about who you can then go to. And to be perfectly honest, we do lack like having a lot of really truly healed elders who can hold those spaces. And so it's like quite a small pool, it feels, or at least maybe, yeah, once you're sort of discerning. And there is a lot that you can do for yourself when you have a big toolkit. And I think that that becomes more and more apparent too, is that you do. And there's something great about that, because you have a resilience that you've learned a lot, and you don't, you know, not everything kind of blows you over, and you can definitely find ways to work with yourself. But I think it would be really foolish not to have that sort of trusted person. And I recently had this sort of moment where someone I work with quite a lot was like, oh, I'm retiring. And I was like, oh no, no. I had an existential crisis about that, and had that real moment of like, oh, what does that mean, you know, and what does that mean for me and for them, and how interesting. And they were very lovely, and they were like, look, I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere, like if you really really need like guidance, I'm, you know, please. But it was fascinating, and I have something that I'm working with, or rather have been working with for a couple of years now, that I'm looking to find the right person to hold the space for me as I move forward. And I think, like everything, you know, at the moment we're in the dream time, and that person will come, and I fully trust the sort of unfolding of that. That yeah, I think to not ever think that you might need, you know, because we heal in community, we don't heal, yeah, we definitely don't heal in isolation. So yeah, it's a big one, isn't it?
Mm. What would you say what would you how would you define the word healer?
I actually think that everybody is. Uh, you know, I don't think there is a definition truly, because it's somebody that mirrors something for us, or opens a space for us to be able to alchemize something. And that could be anything, you know, and anyone. So really everybody is medicine and has medicine, but whether they decide to take their gifts to consciously use them and become responsible for their unique medicine is another thing, of course. But yeah, what is a healer? It's a great question, and I think that's perhaps why I feel so, when someone describes you as a healer, that it sort of feels like that putting you on a pedestal thing, and that sort of can feel quite uncomfortable, because that's not really the point of healing. Yeah, as I see it anyway.
Yes, completely. And there's someone who I follow called Zach Push, and he said that he doesn't call himself a doctor anymore because people come to him thinking they are going to he is going to heal them.
Yeah.
And he said, I am not going to heal them. I am the holder of the space where they heal. And so he creates retreats where people go to experience each other's healing.
Yeah.
And I think for me that is the definition of a healer, is like a space holder holding the space of the whole of the like you say, in community, to experience someone's wholeness. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I have been really called to work with plant medicine so much, is that even our native plants, they're so powerful. And there's I don't know if you've read Rupert Sheldrake's book yet, the Entangled Life book, but
No.
it's just the most profound example of that, where you know humans, we are such a blip on what is a completely incredible interconnected network of life that exists so perfectly. And we sort of have to get out of our own way to realize that we're not like a singularity, that we're actually part of this whole. And yeah, that no one does heal in isolation, and that until we actually as a humanity wake up with a conscious awareness of the fact that that is the case, that we've got to put things aside and actually be able to come together on a very human level and be vulnerable with one another. Like that's it's part of the journey of healing. And exactly that to be a healer is actually to give somebody back their power, to say to them, here's the space in which you realize how powerful you are, and to see them walk away and put themselves back together. And that's just it. It's just holding that space. There is definitely magic that happens. There are definitely ancestors that come in. There are interconnected things that happen, and synchronicities you couldn't possibly have made up. But it's really truly just a space of, I guess a healer is also holding, when you come to them, they're holding that part of you that is you, them, and them that is you, that you're seeing yourself as being on that total equality plane of like, gosh, if you were a part of me, and you'd walked into this room saying, I want myself back, how would you embrace that, and how would you love that? And
Yeah, yeah. And chuck out the pedestal
yeah,
of life.
yeah, and I think that's why so many people feel the call to return to circle. And that sense of the elder circle, which is just, there is no hierarchy there.
Yeah. And in that space, it's like you say, in that space, there, because when we put someone on a pedestal or ourselves, we make that unobtainable, and it's not. We all have the possibility of holding the space for another, and for being in the space and being healed. We all have, it, like you say, in the circle, we're all equal. We're not the same, but we are all equal. We're all unique individuals, beautiful in our many multifaceted different ways. And yeah.
I mean, I've really seen it go wrong. When people pedestal people, there's always a sense of, well, it's like that old guru way of, to some degree, if that person has pedestaled the other person, they have to tear them down, not because they want to or they need to, but like something has to bring them back to humanity. It's like, so
Mm.
they can then create, like we were saying about cord cutting, like a sort of deeper chasm and a deeper trauma that involves now this other person, where it's just, we've realized that we're just, yeah, not coming to ourselves in truth about our own abilities or our own, yeah, our own medicine. And I think there's a piece of being that healer that is holding up the mirror that says that, you know, there is no one behind here. Like, you're looking at the person who can heal themselves.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Wonderful. And do you have a piece of advice out there for other people who are on their self-mastery journey?
I think it would just be to always trust your instinct above all else. And if you are somebody who's really struggled with that because you know, you haven't quite tapped into that, it's just really leaning into that spaciousness that comes from the silence and from connecting with self, and starting to listen and develop and cultivate that relationship with self that sort of ekes out the story, and actually offers a place for, you know, not a blank slate, but a place that's neutral, and a place where you can set aside the bits of you that feels shameful, and then you can sit in that place and slowly bring them back in towards you when you're ready. Yeah, never trust anyone above yourself.
Yeah. I often say, you know, be the guru, be your inner guru, be the one that you're waiting for, be the one that you're looking for, be the one you're seeking for. And yeah, although others can give you information, advice, always come back to yourself for the final nod.
Yeah, and I guess it's like, you know, when we were together in the Heart of the Rose with the cauldron, it's sort of that space that's a circle, and that just gives everybody their time and their space to do what it is they need to do. You know, there isn't a way, there isn't a method, there's no, it's just a space to travel together, and to have maybe what you need mirrored within that space, but to ultimately be in a place where you're going on your own journey, but being witnessed together in that. Yeah, yeah, it's powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, especially from your beautiful sauna.
Yeah,
I
I
want to
know.
be
Oh, it would be great if it was on, but oh. So thank you for coming onto the podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you to Matt and Ken at Thermalux UK for offering their saunas as a space for me to record my podcast in. Soulful Saunas, stories of self-mastery.